These TV series entries can certainly take a while. With the show, you can introduce countless villains and make sizable rogues galleries. Darkwing Duck in particular has a great cast of bad guys, and I hope I'm able to do them justice here. Of course, the one truly dispensing justice is Darkwing himself. The show was pitched as a DuckTales spin-off starring Launchpad as a secret agent, but was retooled into a pulp hero pastiche starring the vigilante Duck we know and love. In his day-to-day life, our hero is average suburbanite Drake Mallard, but when evil rears its ugly head, Drake becomes the terror that flaps in the night, the one and only Darkwing Duck. Launchpad, although not the star as originally intended, is his loyal sidekick. His adopted daughter, Goslin, and her best friend Honker round things out, although Darkwing wishes they'd stay at home where it's safer. I can see where he's coming from. The villains in this show are ruthless. Often in these kinds of cartoons, you get the idea that certain bad guys will pull their punches with kids, but none of Darkwing's enemies seem to feel this way. If they get caught, Goslin and Honker are just as likely to end up on the chopping block right next to Darkwing and Launchpad. It's a cartoon, but they're not playing around here. I was fortunate enough to be able to interview the show's creator, Tad Stones, to give me some insider information on the series. You'll be hearing a few clips here and there, but the full interview will be uploaded shortly after this. Just to remind everyone beforehand, I will only be looking at villains that have appeared more than once in the series. This show boasts an impressive rogues gallery, and I don't think I can cover every one-shot character. I also won't be going over Morgana Macabre, since although she was a villain in her first episode, she quickly reforms and stays a good guy for the rest of the show. The first big villain DW goes against is Taurus Bulba, a massive force both figuratively and literally. Voiced by Tim Curry with a thick Russian accent, he's often viewed as one of the great Darkwing bad guys, even if he only appears in 3 episodes. This enormous bull was once the city's kingpin of crime, before his eventual incarceration. Taurus has not let a little thing like being behind bars stop his operations, he just makes everyone think it has. Right under the smug warden's nose, Taurus secretly continues to oversee his criminal empire. His cell is fully converted into his private office, with his henchmen free to come and go as they please. When any authorities drop by, Taurus hides the evidence. Mr. Bulba has always been in control of things. When he decides it's time to put his master plan into action, he just flies off of the building that he let everyone think was his prison. Afraid not. Ever since he arrived, it's been his headquarters. This says a good deal about both Taurus's skills and the competency of St. Canard's police. Clearly, this city needs someone who can at least try to be on top of things. Enter Darkwing Duck. Darkwing first gets on Taurus's radar when he tries, and fails, to prevent his men from stealing the Ramrod, a secret government anti-gravity device. Taurus had gone after it once before, even having his thugs kill its inventor. Unfortunately, they carried out the deed before they learned the professor's secret activation code. The only other person who can potentially know about this information is the professor's granddaughter, Goslin. The origin story then follows Darkwing's rescue of Goslin, their meeting of Launchpad, and how the 3 of them become a slightly off-kilter but loving family. At first, Taurus waves Darkwing off as a crackpot with delusions of grandeur. When he directly confronts the masked Mallard, Darkwing's confidence plummets. Taurus effortlessly trounces him and leaves him for the police, who believe DW was involved in stealing the Ramrod. Mr. Bulba, as always, is totally in control of things. Darkwing may be a victim of his own ego, but when Goslin is in danger, he gets dangerous right back and manages to stop Bulba's plans. The bull realizes he's underestimated Darkwing and almost takes care of him for good before seemingly dying in an explosion. Taurus would return in one of the final episodes, having been resurrected by FOWL, who we'll cover in just a moment. The evil agency brings him back to life, Bionic Man style, making him into a living, breathing weapon. Bulba doesn't want to answer to anyone but himself, and rebels against his would-be overlords. He goes off to get revenge against Darkwing, and once again comes very close to finishing him off. His only weakness is that his burning rage for DW causes him to overheat, but even then it doesn't last very long. We last see the battleship of a bull promising he'll be back, but the series was sadly cancelled before we saw how their next rematch would have played out.
This is not finished, Darkwing Duck. I will be back!
From a behind-the-scenes standpoint, Stones admitted Bulba's stories seemed a little limited at first, since he was a kingpin type who relied on others instead of getting his own hoofs dirty. Turning him into a cyborg was a great way to get him back into the fray. There was no direct follow-up planned in regards to his final episode, but they generally liked keeping their villains out there in case someone had a good idea for a story later on. Taurus's team consists mostly of other hoofed livestock. Hammerhead Hannigan, a goat voiced by Hal Rail, is his main henchman, tasked with a lot of the dirty work. He works alongside Hoof, a horse that never speaks, and Mouth, a ram voiced by Eddie Deason. Hoof and Mouth are significantly less bright than Hammerhead, and yet he's the one who gets the brunt of his boss's anger when they fail. Hammerhead, I suppose, is just smart enough for Taurus to expect better results from him, putting him in a pretty rough position for that kind of sidekick.
It wasn't our fault, oh, it wasn't our fault! It was their fault, it was their fault!
Clovis, a cow voiced by Marcia Wallace, seems generally more competent and operates Bulba's flying base. Tantalus, a pet vulture, is the only non-mammal of the group. He acts as Taurus's eyes in the sky, carrying a camera with him. After Taurus's initial defeat, the gang seems to have disbanded. Hammerhead would make a cameo in a future episode, looking much larger and more intimidating than he previously was. This time, he's voiced by none other than Tad Stones himself.
Bread, milk, marshmallows? Don't sound like no list of shush agents. Sounds like a fake.
Although the show's initial secret agent premise was mostly dropped, part of it remains with the Shush Agency. This peacekeeping group is so secretive, not even they can say what Shush stands for. Under the watchful eye of J. Gander Hooter, they often reach out to Darkwing to deal with their sworn enemies, FOWL. Unlike Shush, we know that this acronym spells out Fiendish Organization for World Larceny. As the name implies, they're a shadowy organization bent on taking over the world as we know it. At the head sits the High Command, a trio of birds kept entirely in the shadows. We know very little about them, and even their voices change from episode to episode. This doesn't seem deliberate. Continuity errors were common for cartoons across the board in this era, but it actually works in their favor, adding to the mystery. FOWL is constantly in need of money, since their grand schemes are always being thwarted. Many episodes have the High Command ordering a criminal heist to refill their vaults so they can finance their way toward total control. There's a little bit of comfort in these scenes, since it shows that this evil organization is powerful, but not all-powerful. Everyone has money problems sometimes. FOWL's top agent is Steelbeak, a hulking chicken with a nasty sense of humor. He's named after his beak, which is indeed made of steel, ideal for snapping himself out of handcuffs. This was inspired by the James Bond villain Jaws, who had metal teeth. His other inspiration was his voice actor, Rob Paulsen.
He was specifically based on Rob Paulsen, who I'd worked with since Gummy Bears. And Rob would kid around in that voice. And I was saying, I'm going to create a character for that voice. And that's how Steelbeak came to be.
So I says to myself, hey, what kind of an adventure is it if we don't invite the comedy relief? How you doing, Dax?
This smarmy poultry is the most frequently seen FOWL agent, carrying out the many whims of his wicked employers. The bigger and more catastrophic, the better. One episode has his higher-ups order him to rob a bunch of banks. As usual, they're strapped for cash. Steelbeak is offended by this idea, since bank robberies are pedestrian compared to his more daring exploits, like stopping the Earth's rotation or creating weapons of mass destruction. He doesn't dare go against the High Command, though. Their previous top agent who did something like that was put through 6 trash compactors. Steelbeak takes pride in his work, but more than anything, he takes pride in himself. He delivers all his lines with a smug self-satisfaction and laughs at his own mediocre jokes. He's also constantly primping himself, combing his waddle. Perhaps it's to avoid a bad waddle day? Although he tries to put forward a suave demeanor, Steelbeak has an irrational, angry side that tends to appear whenever he's on the losing end of things. Like many villains, Steelbeak can dish it, but he can't take it. Of course, given how ruthless he is even when he's in a good mood, one really needs to watch out when his temper flares up. In Trading Faces, Steelbeak open fires a machine gun on Goslin. Or rather, Darkwing in Goslin's body. It's a long story. When that fails to hit its mark, he tries clobbering her with the gun like it's a baseball bat. In spite of his many losses to DW, FOWL keeps Steelbeak on their payroll. Some of this could be chalked up to practicality from a TV standpoint. Like I said in my Rescue Rangers entry, it would take a lot of work to keep coming up with new FOWL agents who basically played the exact same role as Steelbeak. Giving Darkwing a recurring enemy, a face of FOWL if you will, makes for good entertainment. In-universe, I like to think that Steelbeak sticks around because he does what he's told, he's willing, in fact quite eager, to wipe out large parts of the population if necessary, and he's managed to survive all his encounters with Darkwing, which is something. Until he directly goes against FOWL's orders or he dies in battle, he'll keep popping up. FOWL doesn't just send Steelbeak into battle alone, of course. He's almost always accompanied by Eggmen, the organization's foot soldiers. There's not a ton to say about them. They're the usual bunch of anonymous, dim-witted henchmen. Based on their title, they're mostly male, but some Egg women did appear in the Darkwing Squad episode, acting as Steelbeak stylists. Someone's gotta keep him looking sharp after all. The only other recurring FOWL agent in the series is Amonia Pine, voiced by Mitzi McCall. Once a normal cleaning lady in a research lab, her mind was warped by some experimental chemicals. Based on what we've heard about her childhood, she was always something of a neat freak, but now that she's gone mad, her obsessive nature has made her an ideal FOWL recruit. As long as they give her missions a cleanliness gimmick, she'll do whatever they want. The deeds are dirty, but she keeps things as clean as possible. As you may have guessed, Amonia has one major weakness. She's so focused on keeping things neat and tidy that a little mess will send her into a tizzy. She'll put an entire mission on hold if she detects dirt in the vicinity. Steelbeak teams up with her in one episode and finds her impossible to work with because of this. She also develops a crush on the chicken, which doesn't exactly please him either. We know what made Amonia evil, but her sister doesn't seem to have an excuse. Ample Grime, voiced by Ellen Gertzel, is just as obsessed with dirtiness as Amonia is with cleanliness. Personal headcanon, but I like to imagine Ample was already aligned with FOWL when her sister had the chemical accident. In her new, evil obsessive state, Ample figured she'd do well at the organization. Naturally, there's some friction between them, even though they're on the same team. Their basic needs, clean and dirty, are at complete odds with each other. Even hugging poses an issue. Amonia washes off Ample's grime, and Ample dirties up Amonia. At the end of the day, they really do love each other. Blood is thicker than water, dirt, and dish soap. Darkwing has plenty of foes, but aside from FOWL, his most recurring ones are the members of the Fearsome Five. That's only what they call themselves when they work together. They're more than capable of plaguing the masked mallard on their own, which they do most of the time. The most frequent of them is the electricity-based Megavolt, voiced by Dan Castellaneta. The two of them go back the farthest, with Darkwing fighting him in high school on his very first case. Cue the tragic backstory. Megavolt was once Elmo Sputterspark, a nerdy student with an interest in science. Of course, being a cartoon, this made him a major target for your stereotypical jock bullies. One of their nasty pranks resulted in Elmo running on his experimental shag rug treadmill for hours on end, building up a dangerous amount of static. No one ever made the connection that Sputterspark and Megavolt were the same person, and everyone remained ignorant of what really happened to the poor little outcast. Even Megavolt himself isn't always sure. Although he gained a number of electrical powers as a result of that treadmill, it came at the cost of his sanity. While comic fans have discussed whether or not the Joker can be fully convicted of his crimes, madness or not, the evil clown at least knows what he's doing is wrong. Half the time, Megavolt doesn't even remember his own name. His powers are impressive, but because of his permanently fried brain, he's pretty easy to outsmart. While some of his crimes are of the usual nature, grand-scale theft, world domination, that sort of thing, others only make sense to him. Megavolt believes electronics are slaves to humanity and wants to liberate them. He's brought appliances to life before, but as far as I know, this world does not operate on brave little toaster rules. Appliances are just that, and nothing more. To Megavolt, they're like caged animals, yearning for freedom.
I'm gonna charge you guys up real good. Then you can go back to the wilderness to romp and play with all the untamed light bulbs.
He's a little pitiful in many regards. He didn't seem to have many friends when he was normal, and now forming any sort of meaningful relationship must be even more difficult. When he actually manages to bring some appliances to life, they end up turning on him. Darkwing comes the closest to being his friend, weirdly enough. When he calls Megavolt his archenemy, the villain is actually touched. Even so, he never hesitates to try frying the hero any chance he gets. He's come pretty close to electrifying Darkwing and friends permanently a number of times. Once, he even tried to blow himself up with them in an act of defiance. Knowing Megavolt, he probably forgot about it a few hours later. He's one of the more sympathetic bad guys for sure, tying with our next villain, Bushroot, voiced by Tino Ansana. Poor Reginald Bushroot was a kind-hearted scientist who was studying ways to help people gain energy through photosynthesis. Most of his colleagues belittled or outright bullied him. After the Dean cut his funding, Reginald continued testing on himself, resulting in his transformation into a plant person, capable of communicating with and controlling other foliage. At first, the new Bushroot appears greener, but not really meaner. He gets revenge on the people who wronged him, of course. Whether that's morally justified is up to you, but given how obnoxious these guys were, their comeuppance doesn't elicit much sympathy. It's almost as if the writers realized they'd made Bushroot too likable up to this point, so they introduced his irrational side. One of the only people to be kind to Reginald in the past, Dr. Rhododendron, they love their puns, becomes the target of the lovesick villain. He decides the best way for them to be together is to turn her into a plant as well, and he's not taking no for an answer. At his core, Bushroot is lonely. He was never Mr. Popularity when he was normal, and his new plant-based state makes it even harder for him to make friends. His plant minions are the closest thing he has to actual companions, but it seems like their intelligence only goes so far. As much as he loves his seedlings, Bushroot wants someone he can actually talk to. But that doesn't mean he's not fully devoted to his floral friends. Most of his villainous acts are in service of his plants. Any money he steals is usually for their upkeep and happiness. I think there was only one occasion where he fell into the more stereotypical villain role. The Christmas special has Bushroot get repeatedly abused by the materialistic holiday shoppers, causing him to snap and enter Grinch mode, using Christmas trees to rob everyone. Aside from this, Bushroot seems like one of the relatively nicer villains. In one episode, he and his tree henchmen attack a tea factory in vengeance for all the leaves that have been harvested and crushed to make their product. When the trees get extra violent with the factory workers, Bushroot tries to calm them down, reminding them that the low-level employees aren't the ones at fault here.
Oh, come on now, guys. You can't blame them just because tea is made from plants. Guys?
While he's majorly dangerous to people who cross him, the average citizen doesn't really have to fear Bushroot as long as they're civil. Even Stone says there's a chance of Bushroot someday, dare I say it, turning over a new leaf.
I mean, Bushroot's the one character I say I can see him kind of turning good, but sometimes we team him up with people and he kind of lost that aspect, and I wasn't always on top of it with my writers to kind of guide them back. Don't forget the soft side. But Tino Ansana, who did the voice, was a more forgiving voice that he couldn't really be that evil, you know.
With all this in mind, hypothetically, I'd say I'd be his friend. Unfortunately, because of his chlorophyll-infused brain, there's a good chance Bushroot would try to turn me into a plant as a result. As far as inspirations go, while people often point to Poison Ivy and Swamp Thing, Stone says he's inspired more by DC's Floronic Man and Marvel's Plant Man. Bushroot's only recurring helper is Spike, a dog-like flytrap creature voiced by Frank Welker. While he's not dependable when it comes to acting as a lab assistant, he makes for a loyal pet, ready to attack anyone standing in his master's way. He also has a jealous side that rears its head whenever Bushroot praises someone else. For all of Bushroot's wishes to have a friend, he often forgets that Spike is already a great companion. One of Darkwing's craziest recurring villains is Quackerjack, voiced by Michael Bell. A duck clad in a jester costume, he's certainly eye-catching. Stones initially had a darker character closer to the Joker in mind, hence the clown suit, but he ended up being more silly than anything else. Stones admits that even if it wasn't quite what he envisioned, the most important part is that he's entertaining. While Megavolt and Bushroot lost their minds as a result of science gone wrong, it seems like Quackerjack has always been crazy. He was once a toy maker who ultimately went out of business when kids wanted video games more than what he was selling. The problem is, we've seen Quackerjack's toys, and they're dangerous playthings that could really injure someone. It's not that kids like video games more than toys, they just didn't like his toys. A later episode has him fuming that he's also being outsold by normal yo-yos, driving this home. Maybe the idea is that he used to make normal toys and started making harmful ones when he went crazy, but I don't think they ever make this clear. It feels like Quackerjack makes toys to amuse himself more than anyone. He loves all the destructive goodies he manufactures, but can't understand why no one else does. Speaking as an artist, there's no shame in creating something meant to appeal to you specifically, but you can't get too upset if not many other people feel the same way. In fact, Quackerjack doesn't seem to even like kids all that much. He wants their money, he wants their adulation, but he doesn't really care if they're actually happy. We've seen him knowingly try to hurt children a number of times, sometimes with little provocation. All this ties back into his insanity. For Quackerjack, his crime sprees are playtime. As long as he doesn't get hurt, everything else is all in good fun. He even regards Darkwing Duck as a natural part of the experience.
No, Darkwing Duck always ruins things. It's no big deal, it's just part of the game.
The evil jester has a number of tricks up his sleeve when he plays with Darkwing. Since his toys are so hazardous, they double as weapons pretty easily. His most frequently used ones are chattery teeth that appear to have minds of their own. There's also his Time Top, an enormous top that spins so fast it's capable of traveling through time. If Quackerjack had to choose a favorite, it would be Mr. Banana Brain. In some early episodes, he used exploding wind-up versions of this funny little character, but there's one very special Banana Brain that he keeps close to his side. This one is a puppet that Quacker regularly converses with. Even though he speaks for both of them, Quackerjack really thinks Banana Brain is a living, independent being. He seems to have projected his rational side onto the puppet, since Banana Brain often makes some pretty good points when they're talking together. The only other character who treats Banana Brain like a real person is Quacker's frequent partner in crime, Megavolt. Between the three of them, unfortunately the puppet seems to have the most common sense. This is clinched when Mr. Banana Brain gets possessed by Paddywhack, a Pennywise-inspired clown demon voiced by Phil Hartman. Quackerjack is not surprised in the least when his puppet starts walking and talking on his own. He just remarks that Banana's voice is different, but otherwise acts like nothing else has changed. It's all playtime as usual. Speaking of clowns, on a final ironic note, an alternate universe heroic version of Quackerjack once made a clown doll that sprouted axes from its sides. Somehow, the good Quackerjack created something more twisted and terrifying than his evil counterpart ever did. The next Fearsome 5 member is the Liquidator, voiced by Jack Angel. As his name implies, he's made entirely out of water. Before this, he was Bud Flood, a bottled water salesman. During a heat wave, he decided to take out the competition once and for all by sabotaging his rival's products. When Darkwing came onto the scene, he accidentally pushed Bud into some of the contaminated water, resulting in him becoming the creature he is today. This one is mostly on Darkwing, who wasn't acting with care in the moment. Then again, his catchphrase has never been, "Let's get careful," and this wouldn't have happened at all if Bud wasn't being so underhanded. Despite his transformation appearing painful at first, and probably irreversible, the Liquidator actually seems to be pretty well adjusted. Unlike Megavolt and Bushroot, who have never fully recovered from their mental scars, Liquidator is more than okay with his current state. If anything, it allows him to be even more ruthless. Going after bottled water during a heatwave is bad enough, but as the Liquidator, he can go after all the water. The villain's next move is to solidify all water in St. Canard while driving his own prices up. At heart, Liquidator is still an advertiser, and often talks like a commercial.
Why experience embarrassment, humiliation, panic, when you can surrender right now?
It's a fun character trait, but some writers had an easier time handling it than others.
But the OneNote idea, and maybe it's just because I was not great at doing it, but talking in slogans, a couple of my story editors were fantastic at that. Dwayne Capizzi, I think, was the story editor who really made the most of him and could really come up with dialogue that felt like it was, commercial pitches or something you'd see in a late night commercial.
Partially because of this, he only appeared once as a solo villain, but was still a member of the Fearsome 5. He's certainly a valuable asset to his fellow rogues, even if he plays a smaller role in the series overall. As for a bit of trivia, the character is sometimes cited as being inspired by the Spider-Man villain Hydro Man. According to Stones, the inspiration actually came from a different Spidey foe, the Sandman. The final member, and in fact the leader of the Fearsome 5, is arguably Darkwing's most dangerous enemy, Negaduck. Technically, there were two versions of this character. One episode has Megavolt create a machine to separate one thing into two, a positive side and a negative side. DW inevitably gets hit and splits into a good version and an evil version. The evil one, denoted by his expressively angry eyebrows, calls himself Negaduck and wants to commit crimes instead of stopping them. When he gets hit by the ray again, he grows even more evil, if such a thing were possible, turns black and white, and gains destructive powers. All in all, a typical day in St. Canard. This first appearance was something of a test run. They weren't sure if Jim Cummings could voice a character that was both the same and different from Darkwing. As we know now, he could. They also weren't sure if the storyboarders and colorists could keep the two Darkwings separate without any bloopers. As we know now, they could. Well, about 95% of the time. Since the experiment paid off, they decided to bring him back as a permanent character. This isn't the same one, of course, since he and Posiduck were brought back together to form the heroic but flawed Darkwing we all know and love. No, this new Negaduck is a different character, but it's a similar gist. Essentially, he's Darkwing's evil twin from a mirror universe, the Negaverse. I'm not sure if he named himself after the Negaverse, or named it after him. The second one is a bit more likely. Everything is backwards in the Negaverse. The good citizens of St. Canard are evil, while the criminals are good. Just as Darkwing has dedicated his life to fighting evil, Negaduck has dedicated his life to fighting for evil. Unfortunately, his impact is a lot more apparent than anything DW's accomplished. Darkwing has prevented the destruction of St. Canard many times. The fact that the city is still standing is largely because of him. Negaduck, conversely, has turned his St. Canard into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Darkwing's accomplishments largely go unnoticed or unappreciated by the average citizen, but no one can deny what Negaduck has done to their home. The villain considers the Negaverse to be his personal playground that he can escape to between capers. The reason he's probably drawn so much to the good St. Canard is because it hasn't been destroyed yet. Not to mention, Darkwing makes for a worthy foe. Negaduck hates Darkwing, but I imagine he might appreciate him on some secret level because he serves as a challenge. True, some of his episodes have been kind of silly. It's a cartoon about a duck superhero, so this is to be expected. But for the most part, the series doesn't shy away from the threat that Negaduck poses. He'll happily gather all the loot he can in a pile that almost rivals Scrooge McDuck, but it's really not about the money. It's about the senseless destruction and violence. Negaduck's idea of a good time is running through the streets with a chainsaw, terrorizing whoever's unlucky enough to cross his path. Like Darkwing's most persistent foes, Negaduck just keeps on coming back, even when he's seemingly been gone for good. We've seen him permanently get stuck in slow motion, or in one of his most extreme defeats, sucked into a pit of oblivion. It doesn't matter. He'll return a few episodes later, ready to take on Darkwing Duck as if this never happened. Of course, this can all be chalked up to being an episodic cartoon with shaky continuity. As true as that is, I still like to imagine Negaduck is made of stronger stuff than your average villain, and against all odds, finds ways of essentially coming back from the dead. As for his relationship with the Fearsome Five, it's a little complicated. Negaduck is the one who formed them in the first place. As the fiercest, he's a natural leader, but he can't actually stand them. The other members can squabble among themselves, but they really do have a kind of camaraderie. Negaduck just uses them, plain and simple. As a result, the relatively less fearsome 4 members trip over themselves to try to please their boss. The power imbalance is clear. When they realize Negaduck is taking a much bigger slice of the pie, they even try to fight back, but it's no use. Negaduck is stronger and scarier than all 4 of them combined, and they know it. Eventually, it seems that they decide they're lucky to work with Negaduck at all, and resign themselves to their smaller shares of the treasure.
I get the loot.
What? Why?
Because I said.
This reaches its tipping point when the gang steals a rare jewel. Negaduck escapes with it and leaves the others to get arrested. The criminals naively hope their leader will come break them out, but he has no such plans. He only changes his mind when he realizes the jewel can steal one's abilities. In this case, stealing a bird's power of flight and giving it to a cat. As threatening as he is, Negaduck doesn't have any actual superpowers, but he knows a certain quartet that do. Sapping their powers, the villain becomes Mega Negaduck. Now he has Liquidator's hydration, Megavolt's electricity, Bushroot's plants, and Quackerjack's wackiness. Okay, that's not really a power, but the jewels seem to think it is. Meanwhile, over in the Negaverse, the other Fearsome 5 members are good guys. This makes them the Friendly 4, identical in every way, and even in some personality aspects except their morality. The quirky band of misfits are trained by Darkwing to become actual superheroes. Lo and behold, they're able to triumph over Negaduck and make his world just a little bit nicer. Will they be able to truly turn things around for their city? Time can only tell. Oh, and I do have an incredibly minor gripe about the Negaverse. In Darkwing's world, a secret exit from his house is triggered by a statue of Basil Baker Street. Negaduck not having a statue of Ratigan in his world is a real missed opportunity. When you think of Darkwing villains, Tuskernini might not be the first one to come to mind, but he managed to be a decent foe in his own right. This pompous walrus, voiced by Kenneth Mars, was once a film director before deciding that a life of crime suited him better. Even though he doesn't work in movies anymore, Tuskernini has never lost his directorial instinct. Most of his crimes involve movie making or acting, with him always playing the lead role, in addition to directing, writing, producing. Essentially, he's a criminal auteur. Tuskernini is so vain that he demands his henchmen, a trio of penguins, film all of his crimes and always get his good side. Obviously, this makes for some pretty incriminating evidence, but Tuskernini is a prideful man and insists that these film reels will be worth fortunes someday. Now that true crime has spiked in popularity, it seems like he may have been onto something. His penguin sidekicks make for a great film crew. In a cartoon genre that specializes in dopey flunkies that mess everything up, the penguins are actually quite competent. The only time they made a blunder, it was because Tuskernini made the mistake first. The birds managed to be a nice mix of silly and sinister. A penguin is a naturally comical animal, but these silent characters are devious enough to give them a slightly creepy vibe. On occasion, at least. At this point, we're getting into the lesser villains who only appeared a couple times. Professor Moliarity, voiced by Jim Cummings, is an insufferable little mole who lives beneath the earth. Like your traditional mole people, he wants to rise up and steal the world from the surface dwellers. Although he's shrimpier than most Darkwing villains, not to mention a heck of a lot whinier, Moliarity and his followers aren't exactly pushovers. They have a vast arsenal of weapons, and they're able to overtake the police forces almost instantly in their first appearance. They also own giant pillbugs and carnivorous slugs, which is certainly unique. The problem is, Moliarity feels kind of redundant. FOWL has the crazy weapons category covered, and Megavolt and Bushroot are the warp geniuses. Moliarity just can't stand out from the rest. It's telling that in one of his 3 appearances, he gets arrested minutes into the episode and doesn't come back. It's especially sad considering that Moliarity's debut, That Sinking Feeling, was the first episode written and produced for the series. Darkwing would quickly go up against bigger and better villains, leaving this poor little mole in the dust. Next up is one of Darkwing's more colorful foes, which is really saying something, Jambalaya Jake, voiced by Michael Goff. This pint-sized swamp dweller moved out to the city, assuming that people there would be easier to rob. He certainly has the element of surprise on his side. The St. Canard villains are a zany bunch, but this is a little guy wearing nothing but overalls who works with a giant alligator. In other words, you really wouldn't see someone like him coming. Jake is disappointed to find that the city is protected by Darkwing Duck, and quickly makes it his goal to stop this do-gooder. The crafty Cajun is smarter than he looks, especially when hunting is involved. After capturing Launchpad, he gives DW a most dangerous game style challenge. Darkwing will hunt down Launchpad to rescue him, while Jake hunts Darkwing. Jake's gator companion, Gumbo, is voiced by Jim Cummings, although he doesn't speak much outside of an occasionally audible word or two. Gumbo is, for all intents and purposes, a normal animal, as opposed to, say, an anthropomorphic duck. Despite this, he still walks around on 2 legs and takes care of cleaning their sewer cabin. He alternates between approaching things daintily and acting like a feral beast. It seems to vary based on how hungry he is. In their second outing, Jake and Gumbo journey to Jake's grandmother, Granny Whammy, for a special hex they can put on Darkwing. Granny Whammy is voiced by Billy Hayes, who made a career out of playing witches and crazy old ladies, making her perfect for this role. She's just as crafty as her grandson, and she charges high prices for her spells. When Jake can't pay up, she leaves him at the mercy of Darkwing and Launchpad. Family and business just don't mix sometimes. Splatter Phoenix, the mad artist of St. Canard, only appeared twice, but she left quite an impression, especially in her initial episode. Like many artists, she's frustrated that no one seems to recognize her brilliance. I think we've all been there at some point, whether we're right or not. But she's not just any starving artist. Splatter has developed a chemical compound that can bring art to life and trap others inside paintings. At first, she uses this ability to pull off daring art thefts, in hopes of funding her own career. Eventually, the full possibilities of these powers dawns on her, and she sets out to repaint St. Canard in her image. Splatter's tastes are, well, they're weird. If her goth punk design wasn't enough of a tip-off, she has a fondness for crazy creatures like pumpkin guard dogs, propeller cats, and giant pink gorillas with toasters for heads. It's certainly unique, but you can probably see why mainstream audiences never went for it. Undeterred, Miss Phoenix dismisses them as a bunch of plebeians who are the real losers in the situation. They're just not lucky enough to be geniuses like her. Splatter's high opinion of herself is especially evident in her first episode, where she's voiced by Danny Stahl. She goes on a mile a minute about art theory and the general state of the world. It's hard to make out everything she says on first watch, but it's some terrific voice acting.
What havoc spawns when art appeals to the general middlebrow taste.
What'd she say?
Andrea Martin voiced her in her second appearance. As much as I love her, Miss Martin's brassier take on the character didn't quite make the same impact as the other actress. In the end, Splatter gets hit with a can of turpentine and dissolves, apparently made of paint herself. Only Launchpad seems to realize how crazy this is, and wonders if they're all made of paint, getting dangerously self-aware for a brief second. If it's not already obvious, I really enjoyed this character and wish she had shown up more. As a bonus, the animation in her episode was top-notch for the series, appropriate for an episode all about art. Luckily, the pretentious villainess lives up to her name and rises again in the comics, but we'll get to that a little later. Our next set of villains is the Brainteasers, a group of aliens from the planet Fez. The aliens are never called this by any characters, just in the episode titles, Battle of the Brainteasers, and The Revenge of the Return of the Brainteasers 2. These tricky creatures resemble hats. The theme continues throughout their planet, acting as an intergalactic Lidsville. The buildings also look like hats. One of the spaceships resembles a hat box, and another spaceship looks like a hat rack. The hat motif is the strongest with how the aliens conquer new planets. They sit on their prey's heads and stick suction cups into their skulls, taking over their minds and bodies. The leader, Flarg, voiced by Rob Paulsen, looks like a bowler hat with a Marvin the Martian sounding voice. From what we can gather, he was once the leader of Fez, and a proud galactic conqueror. At some point, a more peaceful race of hat creatures took over, and wanted to steer away from the invasion angle. Flarg, now a rebel, seeks to continue conquering, with or without his plan's approval. He's a very my way or the highway kind of character, who always needs to remind everyone that he's in charge. This is much to the exasperation of his lieutenant, Barada. Voiced by Jim Cummings with a British accent, he resembles a cowboy hat, and has a tendency to gripe about his boss behind his back. Nikto, looking like a newsboy cap and voiced by Richard Caron, is the more good-natured underling. He's one of the many in the classic dumb sidekick archetype, more interested in eating the alien's favorite food, metal, than doing any actual conquering. His appetite has gotten the Brainteasers in trouble a few times, since he sometimes eats important equipment. The alien's second appearance introduces a fourth hat, Talea, a bonnet voiced by Susan Tolsky, imitating one of the Gabor sisters. She's just as ruthless as her cohorts in their takeover mission. The hat's initial plan is thwarted by Darkwing, Launchpad, Goslin, and Honker. Honker, in fact, plays the biggest role in taking the aliens down, so much that he becomes a hero on Fez. This inspires the Brainteasers' eventual return. They try to set off multiple natural disasters across the galaxy and make it look like Honker is the one responsible. Once again, Honker uses his wits against the aliens and comes out on top, making him even more of a hero in the eyes of Fez. Sci-fi fans will recognize two of the aliens' names as a reference to the phrase Klaatu Barada Nikto from The Day the Earth Stood Still. I'm a little surprised they didn't just call the leader Klaatu. Maybe the copyright lawyers only let them use 2 out of 3. Finally, we have the Devil himself, also known as Beelzebub, voiced by Marty Ingalls. The Prince of Darkness first appears in Dead Duck, where Darkwing dies in a motorcycle accident. He winds up in Hell, where the Devil is more than happy to welcome him. Darkwing, for all his egotistical flaws, really is a good person and doesn't belong down there. He hightails it upstairs, where St. Peter is just as happy to accept him into heaven. While the forces of good and evil argue over DW's soul, our fearless hero tries to get back to Earth, unwilling to accept the fact that he's dead. As it turns out, Darkwing is still alive, and the whole experience has been a terrible dream. In a typical gag for this kind of episode, the Devil pops out at the very end, making Darkwing and the audience wonder if maybe it wasn't entirely a dream. Whether it was or wasn't, the Devil made a much bigger appearance in the infamous Halloween special Hot Spells. Due to its overwhelmingly satanic themes, this one was eventually pulled from rotation and has never been re-released on iTunes or Disney+. It is available on the German DVD release, though. Goslin wants to learn magic at Morgana's witchcraft school, but finds that's harder than she thinks. The Devil, still wanting to steal the righteous soul of Darkwing, poses as a janitor and tricks Goslin into taking a book of forbidden spells. The end result is her opening the gates of hell. The Devil takes Morgana hostage and trades her life for Darkwing's. Since Goslin was deceived, it opens up a loophole for her and Morgana to journey down and free Darkwing from Beelzebub's clutches. As to why this episode was banned, while Dead Duck wasn't, I'd say it was because the Heaven and Hell section of that episode was fairly short, while Hot Spells was a lot more overt with its fire and brimstone. I think pulling the episode is a bit of an overreaction, but what can you do? Disney is still somewhat sensitive about occult imagery, given their recent flip-flopping on Dr. Facilier. Personality-wise, the Devil reminds me a bit of one of Disney's future villains, Hades, and not just because of the afterlife connection. Both of them are sleazy with awful tempers, but also have an almost personable side that comes out when they think they're winning. Outside of these two appearances, a pair of identical devils show up as accountants for the Disney studio in A Star is Scorned, voiced by Frank Welker. Typically, I like to group all the mediums into one large section in these videos. That means I should be talking about the DuckTales reboot next. However, since that has a significantly different version of the Darkwing characters than everything else here, I'm going to save it for last, and instead move on to the video games. In the Capcom game, for the NES and Game Boy, the city is being plagued by villains, as usual. This time around, quite a few characters are referred to as FOWL agents, despite having nothing to do with the group in the cartoon. Quackerjack, Liquidator, Bushroot, and Moliarity. Of special note is that Quackerjack is accompanied by Mr. Banana Brain in his boss fight, who drops banana peels on Darkwing. Steelbeak is the leader of the whole operation, of course, and serves as the final boss in FOWL's floating fortress. As you may know, the game was built using the engine from Mega Man 5, so the final level is the equivalent to one of Dr. Wily's castles. There's also an original character, Wolf Duck, a werewolf who FOWL has apparently recruited. Throughout the levels, Eggmen serve as basic enemies. The lesser-known Darkwing game, for the TurboGrafx-16, once again features Steelbeak as the main villain. He's gathered Megavolt, Tuskernini, and Moliarity together so they can take down the hero once and for all. Darkwing captures the non-FOWL characters and uses clues from their lairs to track down Steelbeak. At this point, Steelbeak frees the other villains, and everyone converges at the FOWL hideout where they reveal their secret weapon, a giant robot modeled after DW himself. Who better to take down Darkwing Duck than Darkwing Duck? After the masked Mallard defeats the robot, the four baddies appear to escape in a helicopter. At the last second, Darkwing reveals he's drained the copter of its gas, and we watch as the villains plummet in the distance. Most recently, Negaduck, Megavolt, and Quackerjack have been featured as characters in Disney Heroes Battle Mode. All of them get to cross over with a bunch of other Disney characters. Notable interactions include Quackerjack teaming up with Lock, Shock, and Barrel to take down Flynn's, the arcade from Tron. They've got Wiffle Boy Jr., the sequel to the game that originally put Quackerjack out of business. Even though the plan to trash the arcade fails, Quackerjack gets a small victory when he finds that Boogie's boys actually appreciate his twisted toys. Negaduck tries to cozy up to the Horned King, who he views as an equally worthy villain. The King does not see them as peers, causing Negaduck to have something of an identity crisis, which gets even worse when he has a string of bad luck with evil schemes. After the Horned King tries to make him into one of his Cauldron-born, the Duck decides impressing the Lich is a lost cause. Megavolt wants to form a new Fearsome Five, recruiting Emperor Zurg, Jafar, Hades, and Ursula. They end up begrudgingly teaming up with Buzz Lightyear and Darkwing to take out the game's actual villains, the Creeps. I've a feeling this new Fearsome Five would never have lasted anyway. The other villains are such heavy hitters that Megavolt would have quickly been outclassed. Darkwing's adventures didn't end when his original cartoon did. Over the years, he's had several comic book runs with great new material. During his cartoon, quite a few stories ran in the Disney Adventures magazine, which even introduced a new foe, Fluffy. A shush agent, for whatever reason, experiments on Fluffy the kitten, giving it superintelligence. Everyone, in hindsight, acknowledges this as being a pretty terrible idea. Fluffy fakes his own kidnapping and demands a ransom, all to lure Darkwing into a trap. With his newfound brains, Fluffy plans to take over the city, as one does. His initial plan fizzles out pretty quickly, but he returns twice, upping his game each time. For one thing, he developed his speech. He initially spoke with a lisp, which is absent after the first story. We can chalk this up to him basically learning how to speak in a matter of days. In his second story, he has a gang of cats ransack a grocery store to steal all the canned tuna. This seems like a very typical cat move, but the tuna itself was just a bonus. The real prize was the cans, which Fluffy uses to build a superpowered mecha suit. In addition to being fully weaponized, it gives Fluffy the greatest prize of all, opposable thumbs. In his final appearance, he creates a special powder that compels all the people to abandon St. Canard, leaving it for the cats to take over. In the end, he turns himself in. Even though he got everything he wanted, he realized how lonely things were when he only had a bunch of average cats for company. In the post-cartoon comics, which have been running on and off for the last 15 years or so as of this video, we got to see a number of great storylines. I'll give a quick rundown of just a few. St. Canard is essentially bought out by the mysterious Quackworks Corporation. Deploying its crime bots to keep everyone safe, heroes like Darkwing are rendered obsolete, and the city becomes an oppressive police state. The person running the whole thing turns out to be none other than Taurus Bulba, the cyborg version. After some sort of accident, Bulba's consciousness was transferred into electrical frequencies. Rebuilding himself, Taurus can now control all machinery in a way that Megavolt can only dream of. The only thing he can't master is the Gizmo Duck suit, which becomes a white whale of sorts. Even now that he has the city under his control, he wants that one last bit of tech to be at his command. Darkwing and friends rise to the challenge and bring down their robot oppressor, freeing the people of St. Canard. Around the same time, Quackerjack has undergone a personality shift. Negaduck has found out Darkwing's secret identity and refuses to share it with the toy maker, dismissing him as nothing but a clown. I always figured Negaduck already knew it since they're technically the same person, but I guess I was wrong. Anyway, Quackerjack takes this personally and vows to show everyone that he is not to be toyed with. This brings us to a creepier, darker Quackerjack, perhaps closer to what Tad Stones had originally intended. We really dive into what makes the villain tick, like his tendency to compare himself to others, his paranoia, and his inability to compromise when it comes to his warped creative vision. Eventually, he unleashes his most dangerous weapon yet, a machine that can turn people into toys. After a lot of destruction and soul-searching, Quackerjack ends up using the machine on himself, much to the anguish of his girlfriend. Yes, he briefly gets in a relationship with someone who actually loves him for who he is, despite everything. Pity it couldn't work. In a later series, we see that he either faked his toyification, or somehow got revived and was plotting something big. Unfortunately, that run ended before we found out what he had in mind. Later on, Negaduck teams up with Magica Dispel to flood the city with Darkwings from alternate universes and discredit the hero. This was a few years before the multiverse trope was totally played out. At the same time, Paddywhack makes his grand return and fuses with Negaduck. He could have been unstoppable had there not been a city full of Darkwings willing to take him on. It's a perfect storm, but the winds manage to change in the hero's favor. What has FOWL been doing all of this, I hear you asking? Well, hypothetical viewer speaking aloud to my video, they're trying to summon the eldritch abomination known as Duck-Thulu. Admittedly, not the best pun. Not really a pun at all, actually. Even Steelbeak thinks this is too dangerous, and teams up with DW to stop the ritual. Except, it was all a double-cross to lure Darkwing there to be a sacrifice. Duck-Thulu needs an offering with an enormous ego, and there's no one who fits the bill better than our hero. Much like their dealings with Taurus Bulba, it seems that FOWL has bitten off more than they can chew when the monster turns against them. As always, it falls on Darkwing and friends to keep everyone safe. I should also mention that Splatter Phoenix, having been killed off in the TV series, gets resurrected and leads the heroes on a madcap chase through a comic book convention. She winds up getting trapped in one of the comics, but at least she's alive again. It's implied that Negaduck has plans to release her, but, like in Quackerjack's case, that particular run ended before anything could come of it. In another story arc, toxic ink, first released by Paddywhack and Negaduck's aforementioned fusion, is discovered and manipulated by Magica and the Phantom Blot. The ink, among other effects, can corrupt normal people and turn them into criminals. The most notable person to be affected is Councilwoman Constance A. Denshin. Once a shy, reserved person, the inkified Constance gains confidence and runs for mayor against Darkwing and Launchpad. Her platform is decidedly anti-Darkwing, blaming him for the sheer number of villains plaguing the city. In addition, she adopts a supervillain persona herself, Suff-rage. Her powers involve mind control and the ability to create realistic illusions. Her skills are so impressive that she manages to make it appear that Constance and Suff-rage are different people, complete with extended conversations. In the later revised version of the story, Suff-rage is given an obsessive crush on Darkwing, which helps motivate her. In a following appearance, she's renamed herself Mistrysterious, and her affections for DW are even more pronounced. Another ink victim was Cat-tankerous, real name Mortimer L. Marquand. A schoolchild with an unrequited crush on Goslin, the ink inspired a need for power like never before. The little kitten creates his own battlesuit and goes up against Darkwing. He seems unstoppable, but when Goslin shows up, he gets distracted long enough for DW to defeat him, albeit accidentally. Later, when the St. Canard criminals take over the prison, Mortimer ends up trapped inside with them. Although he seems to have mostly recovered from the effects of the ink, he still has an obsession with villains and offers to join their crew. He even manages to endear himself to Negaduck, which is not an easy feat. At the last minute, Morty discreetly frees Darkwing and Gosalyn from their captors, revealing he hasn't gone over to the dark side after all. Or has he? A little earlier, Mortimer had met none other than Fluffy, the evil genius kitten. We later find out that he smuggled the cat out, and that the two of them are currently cooking up some sort of evil scheme. This, of course, raises the question of how non-anthropomorphic cats work in this universe, but that's something people have been wondering since the 1930s. Recently, Negaduck was given his own 8-issue solo series. The first story arc has him searching for King Midas's magical gauntlet. Taurus Bulba and his men are also on the hunt, as are the Fearsome Four. It's a fun adventure with all the bad guys alternating between teamwork and betrayal every turn of the page. The second arc introduces a bunch of other villains from alternate dimensions who recruit Negaduck into their ranks. What's really impressive about this series is that Darkwing, Launchpad, and Gosalyn are almost entirely absent. It says a lot about how well-written and likable the villains are, since you never really miss the heroes at any point. The bad guys are more than capable of carrying the plot. Darkwing Duck has always had a close connection to DuckTales, especially considering that Launchpad is a major character in both. So when the 2017 DuckTales reboot came out, it was little surprise that Darkwing, along with some friends and foes, got to join in on the action. In this continuity, Darkwing Duck is a TV show that largely follows along the lines of the original. Darkwing's actor, Jim Starling, voiced by original Darkwing performer Jim Cummings, is sadly washed up at this point. He had put his all into the role, doing his own stunts, even when it proved to be a terrible idea. The final straw comes when a pompous director plans to film a gritty Darkwing movie and doesn't contact Starling to be involved at all. Starling's replacement, at least, is a pretty good guy by the name of Drake Mallard. I assume DW's secret identity went by a different name in the show, unless this is the mother of all coincidences. He idolizes both Darkwing and Starling himself. Starling is too blinded by bitterness to acknowledge how much he's touched this fan's life, and sets out to sabotage the movie. The film itself is a lampoon on Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Their version of Megavolt is even dressed like Bane, except this one has a mustache. That's how you can tell he's the bad guy. Starling's destructive antics result in Launchpad finding himself in harm's way. Launchpad is an even bigger Darkwing fan than Drake, which even Starling has to acknowledge. After realizing what he's become, Starling manages to do one true act of heroism and saves Drake and Launchpad from the mess he's caused. The resulting explosion appears to be the end of Jim Starling, but he's revealed to have escaped into the sewers, where he embraces his new role as Negaduck. Even before this, we got a few hints of his eventual fate. When he snaps, Cummings starts giving him touches of the Negaduck voice, and he even gets to hold his beloved chainsaw near the end. Sadly, we never find out what happened to Neo Negaduck, and for all we know, Starling could still be wandering the sewers in a bitter haze. But this would not be the only Darkwing villain in the new series. In the third season, we meet one of Scrooge's top scientists, now voiced by James Monroe Inglehart without a trace of a Russian accent. His major project is the Ramrod, which serves a different purpose than the original cartoon. It can now instantly form anything the programmers want. Huey is suspicious, since no matter how impressive the science is, you simply can't create something from nothing. He turns out to be correct. The Ramrod is actually pulling these objects from other dimensions, and is proven to be very unstable. Too much use, and it will destroy the fabric of reality. Taurus, although initially friendly and charming, has a hidden dark side and won't let anyone get in the way of his experiments. His partner, Thaddeus Waddlemeyer, Gosalyn's grandfather, tried to stop him before and wound up getting thrown into another world, lost forever. In order to stop the heroes, Taurus summons the Fearsome Four from the Darkwing series, which is apparently one of the infinite realities out there. For the most part, these characters are just like their original counterparts. Michael Bell returns to voice Quackerjack, crazy as ever. Keith Ferguson does a good impression of Megavolt. He also voices Liquidator, with Corey Burton having done a few grunts for the character in a previous episode. The only one who's noticeably different is Bushroot, who's now portrayed as a scarier, zombie-like plant monster. Back in the real world, so to speak, the McDuck family has to deal with FOWL. The shadowy overlord in this version is revealed to be one of the heads of Scrooge's own company, Bradford Buzzard. I went over Bradford in the DuckTales entry, along with one of his closest associates, Black Heron. One of the many FOWL agents in the reboot is Steelbeak, now voiced by Jason Mantzoukas. He's still a powerhouse, and still a cocky cock, but this Steelbeak is severely lacking in the brains department. To some extent, he's aware of this major shortcoming, and loudly insists he's not stupid anytime someone even implies he's a dim bulb. Steelbeak proves to be a liability in his first major appearance. Black Heron develops a ray that can boost or drain one's intelligence, with the intent on using it to take down Scrooge. Steelbeak, after getting insulted one too many times, uses the weapon on Heron, and then tries to lower all of Duckburg's brain power to the point that they might be too dumb to remember to breathe. Steelbeak can't grasp the potential scale of destruction he'll create because, well, he is stupid. The agent is brought down by a hyper-intelligent launchpad, and the rest of the mess is cleaned up by a very angry Bradford. Why he didn't fire Steelbeak then and there is beyond me, but the disgruntled chicken continues to serve foul. In the final episode, Steelbeak gets his hands on the Intelliray once more, and actually has a good idea. Instead of using it on everyone else, he boosts his own intelligence, finally becoming the clever, capable Steelbeak we know and love. While quite a few of the villains are taken down, Steelbeak is now smart enough to know when to bail out, and runs off before the good guys can capture him. The Eggmen also appear, now renamed the more gender-neutral Eggheads. While we saw a few female members in the original series, there's a lot more in the reboot, with one woman, Pepper, voiced by Amy Sedaris, playing a somewhat major role. For more on her, refer to my catch-up entry, where I also talked about her fellow agent, the Phantom Blot. That wraps up our look at the many villains of St. Canard. Darkwing's adventures will most likely continue in some way, shape, or form for years to come. Someone has to keep the city safe, and who better than the terror that flaps in the night? A huge thank you to Tad Stones for giving the inside scoop on all these great characters. And of course, thank you as always to my viewers. In our next video, we'll be looking at the Hunter Extraordinaire Gaston. My, what a guy.